So this is a test run of the comfort kit that I made just to show you kind of what we're going to end up with. I did make the fabric ties myself because I ran out of the twill tape, but now I know how much is needed for it. So, and I used a quilting cotton for this example, and I would use, if you want to use a quilting cotton, use 2 layers of the fabric for everything. I did it for the pockets and everything, so it didn't seem sturdy enough as a single layer, and that way you don't see the plain side of the fabric, you see the print on both sides. And if you have a directional print, make sure that it doesn't end up upside down on the inside. And so I chose to kind of go off of from what the instructions advised, and I used the twill tape to bind all of the pockets edges. And so if you want to do that, and I'm going to show you how to, you'll need about 6 yards of the twill tape. You'll need just the recommended 4 yards in the pattern. If you don't use the twill tape to finish the edge, you can just fold over the edge twice, fold it over 1/4 inch, press, and then fold over 1/4 inch again and press. That way your raw edge is tucked inside. You can finish it that way, and then you wouldn't need as much of the twill tape. But just if you do that, when figuring out the measurements of your pockets, you'll need to add about 1 inch. If you do a bigger seam allowance, you'll need more for that finishing the edges, because it will take away 1 inch if you just do the 1/4 twice on each side. I decided to add in a zipper. I thought it was a nice addition. And then you'll need some snaps for the pockets here. If you want, I just used one for each one. And used the sew-in kind. Just used this kind of basic snap. So you can see I have my fabric cut out. I'm using a piece of 100% cotton canvas, and the overall width of the fabric that how it was on the bolt was 59 inches from one edge to the other, which is a lot longer than what's called for in the instructions. You just need 36 inches of width. And so this is my folded edge here, and so this is my 18 inches half yard measurement of the fabric, and then once I fold this out, that'll be this 36 inches. And so what I did is I'm going to show you how to put in a zipper for one of the pockets. So with that leftover material that I had from my 18-inch wide piece, I just cut off a 2-inch strip, which is what you can see over here. So it's 18 inches long right now and 2 inches wide. And then once we cut out the measurements for the pattern, I'll measure this distance again and then cut this piece to be that length to make sure that I have the right length for it. And so you can see I have the markings for where we need to cut our fabric, and I have it folded over so I only have to cut these once. So you can see here what it looks like once I have gotten those pieces cut out and opened it back up. You can see that I have those 4 pieces, and the instructions labels what each piece is what. So the piece that comes out of this corner is A, this is B, this is C, and this is D. And then it shows on the diagram where the pockets come from, which piece of fabric. To get the size for the pockets, for the flat pockets, what I did is I just took A, I flipped it over so the angle lined up, and I put it in behind and lined it up with this edge here and along the top. And then I just traced the other edge from the flap onto the back onto A directly. So that way I could just cut it out. I don't have to do any measuring. So I've now cut out the flat pockets, and you can see the material for my pocket over top on the flaps. You can see how much we have left over from after cutting off the flat fabric. So there's quite a bit of extra left after cutting out those pockets. Now I have placed the B and D here in the middle, and you can see that I have these lines here. I measured from my points up on the pocket as to where to know, what length I wanted these pieces to be, and that was 8 inches on mine. So I just drew a line on both 8 inches, and then on this one, the D, which is going to make up the bottom row of pockets, there's one that is a separate pocket from the longer piece over here. So I just measured 2 inches. I thought that'd be a good width for a pocket that you can still easily get your fingers down into it. And we aren't losing much or anything for seams to finish the pockets because we're going to be covering all the edges with the binding. So our pocket, will still be 2 inches. We aren't having to fold over any raw edges or anything to keep them from fraying. We'll just close them up in binding and twill tape. So our next step is to bind our pieces with our twill tape. And I bought 1-inch twill tape to use. I just thought it would give me be the easiest to work with in a way, because you are going to need to fold it in half. And I did that, and I pressed it with my iron so I have a nice crisp edge so I know where my fabric needs to butt up against, so that way it's even on both the front and the back sides. And then for our pockets, you need to be aware that you don't need to bind the outer edges for a pocket if it's going to be enclosed in our final binding of the outer edge of the whole kit. So for example, these flaps, you only need to do along the top edge separately on each one. Our zipper section needs just the long edge, one of the long edges done, because the other edge is going to be attached to our zipper. And then for these center ones, you do need to do all 4 edges. For our flap pockets, so I folded over these flaps here, so you can see this is the raw edge. On this side, you also need to bind this edge. And over here, if you're putting in a zipper, you won't need to because the zipper is going to be attached to this edge. But if you're just going to do one big pocket, close with some snaps or something, then you would also want to put the twill tape and bind this edge. So I'm going to show you the easiest and neatest way I found to do the corners for the interior pockets that you have to bind all the edges for. And so you see I've done one corner here, and I got this one partially done. What you do is you back tack at the start when you start sewing. You sew up, and then I put a needle here, a pin, at the corner, so that way I know where the corner is and where I need to stop to be able to rotate up and go off that edge of that corner. So you can see here, that's what I've just done. And it's not perfect because I'm not marking the line. You could just draw the line on there. You can see easily through the white twill tape at least to be able to do that. And so once you've sewn that first part, you take your fabric and press it up into that seam that we created by ironing our twill tape and press it down. Then pin it to place. Then you're ready to sew along this edge, and you can see the shadow of the fabric behind this white twill tape, which makes it easier to show. So I'm gonna be sewing this way. So I want to put my pin just on the far side of where that corner is. So that way I can sew up to the pin and know that I'll be lined up if I come up to this edge. So we're now ready for doing our zipper, since we have everything else that we can currently bind with the twill tape done. And for the zipper, you want one that's longer than your piece. So if you decide to change the size of this, you just want to make sure that you have a long enough zipper that can go the full length of whatever this dimension ends up being. For the first step, we are going to take the extra piece on the 2-inch wide piece, that's the same length as this, and place it with our zipper right side up, and we're going to place the unfinished edge along the top. And it doesn't, I mean, you can favor one side or the other, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that both ends are going off. And then the next step is, and you can press your fabric if you'd like, just be aware of your zipper teeth. If they're plastic, you don't want to melt them with your iron. So you can press this and down and back, but I'm just going to hold it taut and make sure that it stays taut the whole way, and sew really close to this edge and sew that down, because if it stays loose, the fabric can get up into the zipper and make it catch. We don't want that. So once we have this side piece attached to our zipper, we want to attach the flat piece to the zipper as well. And you'll do that, we need to line it up on this side, but as you can see, you can't see where your fabric is laying easily. So we can just open this all the way up, hold it in place so you know that you are still orienting it correctly. And we want to line the bottom edge of the fabric to our side piece that we've already attached. And then again, just hold it in from the edge of the zipper tape just a little bit and pin it in place. And again, sew up that edge. And I forgot to say earlier that I'm using a zipper foot because that lets you more easily get up closer to the zipper. So our next step, since we have our zipper fully attached to the fabric pieces, is to get this final edge attached down to the main portion of our comfort kit. And to do that, I already drew an edge, a line here, and that's 1/4 of an inch in from each corner that's created with these flat pieces. And that's because when this is sewn down, we want this flap to be able to fold in really easily. We want to trim up our zipper ends, so you just trim it up so that it's just even with the ends of our fabric. However, before you do the top one, make sure to pull your zipper pull down into your piece of work, because otherwise when you trim off that end, your zipper pull is going to go with it, and you don't want that. So for our next step, we need to get the pockets placed that are going to end up bound shut with our twill tape binding. And so that's this flap over here, opposite of the zipper one, and the 2 flaps on the top and bottom. And for these in particular, if you have them flush like this as they lay and you sew it down, it's not going to have that much give to be able to fill it. It's going to be very limited. So what you want to do is actually pull the edge in a little bit on each side. So that's about 1/8 of an inch. And we'll do that on the other side. And then that will create so much more space for bulkier items. You know, if you have a pill bottle or, chapstick or whatever you want to put in your pockets. So I have everything pinned and ready to go, and I'm ready to start getting the twill tape along the edge. And to do that, I've started with my very end. I've tucked it under and ironed it there, pressed it down so that way it stays down more easily. And then since I've pinned parallel to my edge instead of perpendicular, I can get my twill tape binding pressed down, it opens up for me, pressed down along that edge, pin it in place, and then remove the pin that was holding the fabric together originally. And then just go along, and I'll show you what I do when I get to one of these interior corners. So you can see I'm now ready to go into my corner here. And what you want to do is press your twill tape down and hold it at the corner point there. with your left hand. And then with your right hand, bring the twill tape and make a pleat in it. Fold it up on itself, which is sometimes easier said than done. It's easier to do when it's flat on the table. There we go. It's close. And then, you can see that you adjust, it's ready to go. And as the pocket size, how, the instruction doesn't definitively give you, what size each piece of fabric should be. It also doesn't give you exactly where the placement should be of them. And so I've just kind of laid them out how I thought would be nice. We do need to attach a strap on the back side at this kind of folding spot. So I've tried to leave the center or approximate center of it clear, so that way I know I can easily sew that tie on onto the back side and not sew through a pocket. So you can see I've gotten kind of midway through my pockets, and this one's already attached at around the edges, and I just need to put in the lines for the dividing points. And I didn't add quite as much space into this one, so I just kind of shoved it around. Whereas this one down here has a lot more space in it. And so actually what I did is I made this one flat, like I discussed how it was on the diagram. And then all the other extra fabric in here, I actually created 2 little pleats. And I just folded it under, tucked it under itself to gather up that fabric so it wouldn't be like puckered all the way across. So I just have one tuck in there on each side. So we're ready for the last finishing touches, and one of those is to add hanging loops at the corners of at the top edge. And you want to make sure that your pockets are facing upright so that when you attach the loops, everything wouldn't fall out of them. And for the edges of my twill tape, I just have it folded over. I think that makes a better loop size than if it's folded out. And these are about 4.5 inches long, the pieces I made. And I did put fray check on each end, so that way I don't have to worry about trying to tuck them under and then also sew the loop at the same time or attach the loop at the same time. So now we're ready to attach our ties that will close everything up. So we will attach 2 smaller ties, one to each of these flaps here, so that way on the back side, the outside edge, so that way they can tie together and stay closed. And then we will also tie a loop here on the kind of back side, the underside of this edge, and then another tie on this edge. And the only instructions for what the lengths of the tie should be is for the one that's attached to this flap here, to that outside edge. And it just says that it needs to be long enough to wrap around twice. So that's all the instructions we have for that. So the very last step that I have to do is to add my snap closures onto these 2 pockets. And if you wanted to add them onto other pockets, you could. When you sew on that bottom closure point, you don't want to sew it straight down, like when the fabric is flush and flat. If I did that, you can see I have some items in this pocket. You can see that it pops up over here. And so if you actually sew it in a little bit into the pocket, then it's not popping up. And so that will just help it, stay flatter when you're trying to, tie it all together. So we have our completed comfort kit now. I have my snaps sewn in. And let's see, and these I ended up using 4.5 inches of twill tape for this one. And this one ended up being a little bit longer, I think closer to maybe 5.5. So if you want a bow, you'll probably need a little bit longer there. And this strap, the very long one, was about 36 inches. And there we go.